Okay, hello everyone. Today we're continuing our study of Manifesto of the Communist Party, the Communist Manifesto. It's part 4 today, and we're finally uh, coming to the second chapter. Is It is Proletarians and Communists, right? Uh, Now, I actually do not think that today we're gonna need to use the notes that I'm having on the left side of the screen at the moment. But just to make sure that we have everything that we possibly might need today, I'm still having this on. I will think about what to do with this if it's not going to be useful today, just as it wasn't useful previously. So without any uh, wasting any more time, let's come to the study. All right, so chapter 2, Proletarians and Communists. In what relations do the communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? The communists do not form a separate party opposed to the other working class parties. They have no interests separate and apart from those of proletariat as a whole. They do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. So I'm gonna need to stop here and to look for the word sectarian. Denoting or concerning a sect or sects. So that does mean something to do. This has something to do with sects. Okay, they do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. The communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. First, in the national struggles of the proletarians of the different countries, they point out and bring to the front of common interest of the entire proletariat independently of all nationality. Second, in the various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. Mhm. So they do not work for a certain nationality; they work independently of it, and at various stages, they represent the interest of the movement as a whole. So do not sacrifice the whole movement for the benefit of some parts of it. Okay. The communists, therefore, are on the one hand, one hand practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country. That section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. The immediate aim of the communists is the same as that of all other proletarian parties: formation of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of the bourgeois supremacy, conquest of political powers by the proletariat. The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would be universal reformer. They merely express in general terms actual relations springing from an existing class struggle, from a historical movement going on under our very eyes. The abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of communism. All property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical change consequent upon the change in historical conditions. Okay. So I had to stop a bit earlier. The immediate aim of the communists is the same as that of all other proletarian parties. So they kind of imply what are the goals of all other proletarian parties, for which I'm not really sure what are the alternatives for the proletarian parties. To this day, I'm not really sure. Uh, is there any other party that associates itself with proletarians? Not sure. Actually, it's a good place to start googling. Uh, Proletarian parties. Hmm. So we have some parties that are directly linked in Wikipedia. I wonder if this means some actually. Oh no, I wanted to say if those parties are active till this day, but no, they're coming and going. And the dates are not actually corresponding to the same period as the Communist Manifesto was written. Uh, Sorry. Other than communists. Well, nothing wrong with a bit of Wikipedia here. Okay, it doesn't look like we can find the information quickly, but we'll take it as it is presented here in the document. So there are other political parties that are associated with proletariat, and all of those parties have to have the same, or at least it's implied that they have the same goals, right? Uh, Formation of proletariat into a class, which I thought was already done by the time this is document is written. Overthrow of the bourgeois supremacy, obviously. Conquest of political power by the proletariat. Okay. Well, this actually makes sense for every political party, especially if they are associating themselves with proletarians. Okay, good. The theoretical conclusion is no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or would be universal reformer. They merely express in general terms actual relations springing from an existing class struggle, from a historical movement going on under our very eyes. The abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of communism. All property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical change consequent upon the change in historical condition. The French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favor of bourgeois property. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. But modern bourgeois private property is the final and the most complete expression of a system of producing and appropriating products that is based on class antagonisms, on the exploitation of the many by the few. In this sense, the theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property. Mhm. We communists have been repreached with the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as the fruit of a man's own labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. Hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property. Do you mean the property of petty artisan and of the small peasant, a form of property that preceded the bourgeois form? There is no need to abolish that. The development of industry has to a great extent already destroyed it, and is still destroying it daily. It's actually an interesting line. So abolition of private property that does not include property of a petty artisan and of a small peasant. I don't. It doesn't really. It's not clear at the moment where do they draw the line, or do they imply that the fact that well, current development of the industry already destroyed that type of property? Does that mean that that communists do not abolish this small property because they allow it, or do they not abolish it because this type of property is already sort of abolished, right? Not clear at the moment. Or do you mean the modern bourgeois private property? But does wage labor create any property for the laborer? Not a bit. It creates capital, that kind of property which exploits wage labor and which cannot increase except upon conditions of begetting a new supply of wage labor for fresh exploitation. Let's check this shortly. Beget, especially of a man, bring a child into existence in the process of reproduction. Cause, bring about. Okay. It creates capital, that kind of property which exploits wage labor and which cannot increase except upon conditions of begetting a new supply, of course, in a new supply of wage labor for fresh exploitation. Property in its present form is based on the antagonism of capital and wage labor. Property in its present form is based on the antagonism of capital and wage labor. Let us examine both sides of this antagonism. To be a capitalist is to have not only a purely personal but a social status in the production. Capital is a collective product, and only by the united action of many members, nay, in the last resort, only by the united action of all members of society, can it be set in motion. Capital is therefore not only personal, it is a social power. When, therefore, capital is converted into common property, into the property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. It is only the social character of the property that is changed. It loses its class character. So, when the capital is converted into common property, the property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into the social property. It is only the social character of property that is changed. It loses its class character. Let us now take wage labor. I honestly do not get this paragraph. Okay, the average price of wage labor is the minimum wage. That quantum of the means of subsistence which is absolutely requisite to keep the laborer in bare existence as a laborer. What, therefore, the wage laborer appropriates by means of his labor merely suffices to prolong and reproduce a bare existence. We by no means intend to abolish this personal appropriation of the products of labor, an appropriation that is made for the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith to command the labor of others. All that we want to do away with is the miserable character of this appropriation, under which the laborer lives merely to increase capital, and is allowed to live only in so far as the interest of the ruling class requires it. In bourgeois society, living labor is but a means to increase accumulated labor. In communist society, accumulated labor is but a mean to widen, to enrich, to promote the existence of the laborer. Mm-hmm. So in bourgeois society, the goal is to increase labor force. In communists, accumulated labor is a mean to increase, to improve the existence of the laborer. It's funny that they formulated in such a way, because in bourgeois society, living labor is but a means to increase accumulated labor. But what is the mean to what is the means to uh, accumulated labor itself, right? Because when they compare to communist society, they start with this accumulated labor is but a means to widen and reach. And what is the means to for accumulated labor? Uh, what is a mean to in bourgeois society in such way? I kind of can guess that it might mean that the accumulated labor in bourgeois society is but a mean to increase the capital, but it's just my uh, guesstimates, right? In bourgeois society, therefore, the past dominates the present. In communist society, the present dominates the past. In bourgeois society, capital is independent and has individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality. And the abolition of this state of things is called by the bourgeois abolition of individuality and freedom, and rightly so. The abolition of bourgeois individuality, bourgeois independence, and bourgeois freedom is undoubtedly aimed at. By freedom is meant, under the present bourgeois conditions of production, free trade, free selling and buying. But if selling and buying disappears, free selling and buying disappears also. This talk about free selling and buying and all the other brave words of our bourgeois about freedom in general, have a meaning, if any, only in contrast with restricted selling and buying, with the fettered traders of the Middle Ages, but have no meaning when opposed to the communistic abolition of buying and selling, of the bourgeois condition of production, and of the bourgeoisie itself. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property. Yes, we do. But in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 90 tenths of the population. For 9 tenths of the population. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non existence in the hands of the 9 tenths. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with the form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence is the non existence of any property for the immense majority of society. Well, I've heard a great phrase that people vote for with their aspirations, not their current conditions. Uh, so, if the real aim is to, as they say it earlier, to widen and enrich to promote the existence of the laborer, to what degree do they mean to enrich it, right? Because right now it's said that proletarians are at a state when they earn minimum wage. It is barely enough to keep them alive and to propagate their like and to propagate. Period. But if they would be a bit richer, I am absolutely sure that some kind of the form of private property uh, would be required for them, right? So at this point, it sounds as if the abolition of private property should be like a intermediate goal, right? So they uh, abolish it, and at some point after that, they would they should restore it, right? The private property should be reappeared because if now the cause of abolishment of the private property is that it doesn't exist for the 9/10 of the population, then by definition, at some point when everybody would be able to have this private property, should it be restored? I wonder if this was addressed later in the document, but at the moment, I do have some problems uh, with that line. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so, that is just what we intend. From the moment when labor can no longer be converted into capital, money, or rent, into a social power capable of being monopolized, meaning from the moment when individual property can no longer be transformed into bourgeois property, into capital, from that moment, you say individuality vanishes. Okay. You must therefore confess that by individual you mean no other person than the bourgeois, than the middle class owner of property. This person must indeed be swept out of the way and made impossible. Wait a second. This person must indeed be swept out of the way and made impossible. Impossible to exist? Well, I guess I can get the hostility to the exploitative bourgeois middle class owner of property. I'm not sure about that. What do they mean about middle class? Is bourgeois is high class or middle class? Oh, in English, the term bourgeoisie is often used to denote the middle class. In fact, the French term encompasses both the upper and middle economic class, a misunderstanding which has occurred in other languages as well. Hmm. So this is a fault on my part. I saw that middle class is not the same as the bourgeoisie. All right, all right. Okay, communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is to deprive him of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of such appropriation. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease, and universal laziness will overtake us. According to this, bourgeois society ought long ago to have gone to the dogs through sheer idleness. For those of its members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work. The whole of this objection is but another expression of the tautology, that there can no longer be any wage labor when there is no longer any capital. All objections urged against the communistic mode of producing and appropriating material products have, in the same way, been urged against the communistic mode of producing and appropriation intellectual products. Just as the bourgeois, the disappearance of class property is the disappearance of production itself. So the disappearance of class culture to him identical with the disappearance of all culture. That culture, the loss of which he laments, is for the enormous majority a mere training to act as a machine. Okay, so I'm guessing that they mean by that since most culture now is trained to be appendages of the machine, the disappearance of this culture, class culture, based on private property is nothing but, for majority, a disappearance of culture of being an appendage to machine. Okay, this is a. I do not really get where this comes from, but all right. No, I get it, but I I cannot like feel all the connections there required. So I feel like the soft outlines of the thoughts, but it's not an easy read, that's for sure. But don't wrangle with us so long as you apply to our intended abolition of bourgeois property, the standard of your bourgeois notions of freedom, culture, law, etc. Your very ideas are but the overgrowth of the conditions of your bourgeois production and bourgeois property, just as your jurisprudence is but the will of your class made into a law for all, a will whose essential character and direction are determined by the economical conditions of existence of your class. So they are telling us that uh, we keep we keep grasping for private property, but we do so because we are sort of brainwashed by the bourgeoisie and how they force their own values on us with their culture, law, and notion of freedom. Okay, and everything has to do with the economy. Mm. Okay, let's go with that. The selfish misconception that induces you to transform into internal laws of nature and of reason the social form springing from your present mode of production and form of property, historical relations that rise and disappear in the progress of production, this misconception you share with every ruling class that has preceded you. Selfish misconception that induces you to transform into internal laws of nature and of reason the social form springing from your present mode of production and form of property. Historical relations that rise and disappear in the progress of production. This misconception you share with every ruling class that has preceded you. I don't really understand what that means. So we share a misconception with every ruling class that preceded you. I'm not sure that we are the ruling class. I don't even really understand to whom uh, this text at the moment. Uh, who are they talking to? Misconception that makes you transform social form springing from your present mode of production and form of property into eternal laws of nature and of reason. Okay, I guess this is what they mean. They could have phrased it a little bit clearly. What you see clearly in the case of ancient property, what you admit is the case of feudal property, you are, of course, forbidden to admit in the case of your own bourgeois form of property. Okay, so these lines pro- probably were directed at the bourgeois, or maybe not. What you see clearly in the case of ancient property, what you admit in the case of feudal property. Yes, this is extremely hard to read. What you see clearly in the case of ancient property, what you admit in the case of feudal property, you are, of course, forbidden to admit in the case of your own bourgeois form of property. Okay, so it means like that we cannot really analyze our current time because we can't like move away from the situation we're into. We cannot separate ourselves with the things that we are uh, surrounded by, but we can do so with like previous societies that are far gone, that are of ancient time, Egyptian, for example. Why do I tell Egyptian? Ancient, of course, ancient. Uh, Ancient property, feudal property, we see. Okay, so we see some issues with some form of properties uh, that are happening in that have happened in the past. We see those issues, but we are blind to the modern issues, or not even blind, but rather forbidden to notice, forbidden to admit. Okay, and all of that because the current ruling class imposes their will on us through laws, culture, and some other ideas, maybe in aspirations. I'm not sure that this has anything to do with proletarians because I'm not sure if any proletarians at some point were able to transform into a bourgeoisie. I mean, of course, the individual proletarians, individual laborers. As this document implies, the conditions for those laborers were such horrible that they were barely able to prolong their own existence. Minimum wage and so on. And minimum wage at that time, it's no joke. As I said in the previous streams, which of course did not, it's not I who said it. That is taken from other sources. That at some point people had to live for $1 a day in today's dollar, so they wouldn't be able to afford anything except for like food and maybe occasionally some uh, priority needs, right? Maybe clothing or something like that. Abolition of the family. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. What? Well, I've heard that the Communist Manifesto has something to do with the abolition of the family, but just bluntly proposing it? Is that what I think it is? On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain. In its completely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeoisie. But this state of things finds its complement in practical absence of the family among the proletarians and in public prostitution. What? Okay, so as the present family based upon capital, and so because only bourgeoisie have any capital at all, I guess, only they have properly formed, developed family. But among the proletarians, as they do not have enough capital or any capital, they do not have proper families. Practical absence of the family among the proletarians and in public prostitution. I recall in that sometimes previously in this document, they were mentioning some issues that proletarians, the working people, have with their family. I remember that they called that the family is being reduced not just to some financial relations, and the implication is that, well, everyone in the family has to work from the earliest stage. And since the industry did away the hard physical labor, or at least it reduced the necessity for hard physical labor. So not everybody in the production line have to perform hardest physical labor. That means that women and children were not only allowed, but weirdly speaking, welcomed uh, to the work in the industry, in the modern contemporary at the time industry. Uh, so I can feel like, since mothers were away at work and children from the earliest age were also performing some tasks at the factories or in some other places of employment. But I guess the primary place of employment were factories at the time. Uh, the family, in our current understanding, families were not existing. So people came home only to sleep, and then extremely early they would have to go to work and work all day, and every relations between each other were reduced to some sort of what's it called, a common budget, probably. Yeah, probably something like that. Okay, so this was I'm betting that this was relating to that notion, to that note that was taken from the previous part, bourgeoisie and proletarians. Well, about the public prostitution, of course, I have nothing to say because I'm not familiar with the situation in the times of the middle of 19th century. So let's keep going. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty. What? Well, of course, we do want to stop the exploitation of children. I think I'm not following the logic here. Uh, so exploitation of children is due to the fact that their parents live in such they work such minimum wages that even two working parents are not enough to have anything at the table. I'm guessing that's the reason, not some wicked whatever wicked state of mind, right? And this is not because they want that to happen, but rather because they are forced to happen. So it sounds as if the capital, this issue that they're describing and they're trying to work against, issue with the bourgeoisie, as they see the bourgeoisie to be the main cause of such horrible times. If they would be able to get rid of them, and I assume that this is enough to establish, if not the best time of Earth, then at least better times. Then why do they have to bring the abolition of the family as if it's the as if it is uh, the only means to stop the exploitation of children. This is hard. This logic, I do not follow this logic at the time. Okay, but I can respect the intention to stop the exploitation of children by their parents, especially well, to stop the exploitation of children. Period. Right? Because at this point in history, children were working like a little bit shorter shifts than the adults. So this truly might be a revolutionary way of thinking about this, right? But again, I do not follow the full logic here. Okay, let's move on. But you say we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social. And your education, it is not that also social and determined by the social conditions under which you educate, by the intervention direct or indirect of society by means of schools, etc. Is not that also social? Uh-huh. Okay. We destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social. But they object to that, saying that your education is also social and determined by social conditions under which you educate by intervention, direct or indirect, of society by means of schools, etc. Okay, got it. The communists have not invented the intervention of society in education. They do but seek to alter the character of that intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. Okay, but of course, on the side note, I'm betting that whoever is the teacher, he will, to the at least to the smallest degree, the teacher will influence uh, pupils to share at least some of his beliefs. Okay. The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hollowed correlation of parents and child, becomes all the more disgusting, the more by the action of modern industry. What? The hollowed correlation of parents and child becomes all the more disgusting. The more by the action of modern industry, all the family ties among the proletarians are torn asunder, and their children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor. Well, as every other person of the working class, according to this document. But you communists would introduce community of women, screams the bourgeoisie in chorus. The bourgeois sees his wife a mere instrument of production. He hears that the instruments of production are to be exploited in common and naturally can come to no other conclusion than that the lot of being common is all will likewise fall to the woman. Being common to all will likewise fall to the woman. He hears that the instruments of production are to be exploited in common and naturally can come to no other conclusion than the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the women. He has not even a he has not even a suspicion that the real point aimed at is to do away with the status of women as mere instrument of production. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous indignation of our bourgeois at the community of women, which they pretend is to be openly and officially established by communists. Which they pretend is to be openly and officially established by the communists. The communists have no need to introduce community of women. It has existed almost from time immemorial. Maybe it's as if community of women is. What do they mean by that? Okay. Women communities are safe spaces that make it easier for them to be candid, original, and authentic, and where expression of vulnerability are encouraged. These communities are where women can go to at any time to feel safer and empowered. Okay, okay, okay. What? Okay. So this is like literal sense. They do not have anything under it. I'm guessing at the time. Our bourgeois, not content with having wives and daughters of their proletarians at their disposal, not to speak of common prostitutes, take the greatest pleasure in seducing each other's wives. Our bourgeois, not content with having wives and daughters of their proletarians at their disposal, not to speak of common prostitutes, take the greatest pleasure in seducing each other's wives. Okay, bourgeois marriage is in reality a system of wives in common, and thus, at the most, what the communists might possibly be reproached with is that they desire to introduce in substitution for a hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. For the rest, it is self-evident that the abolition of present system of production must bring with it the abolition of the community of women, springing from that system, meaning of prostitution, both public and private. What? This is the hard stuff. I have very hard time to follow this logic. What is the community of women according to this document? I have strong suspicion that this phrase here means that community of women means prostitution both public and private. What? And they do not condone it. Okay. System in common, wives in common, and thus, at the most, what the communists might possibly be reproached with that they desire to introduce as a substitution for a hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. For the rest, it is self-evident that the abolition of present system of production must bring with it the abolition of the community of women, springing from the system. Okay, so I'm, as I understand at the moment, this means that uh, what they're trying to say is that bourgeois have a sort of community of women, which they claim to be not the community as if in modern sense, which I just googled a minute ago, but community in a sense that literally common women, so common for everybody. And what this document implies is that, to my understanding, is that bourgeois have those common women uh, already among each other, but it's concealed. And they kind of accuse communists of the idea of having the legalized community of women, which I don't understand the positions of the authors of this document too. Do they want to introduce this community? Do they deny it? But they draws the conclusion that at the point of the abolition of the capital, there would be no need for the community of women. I don't see them to deny it, actually. It says that at the best part here that the communists have no need to introduce community of women, but not because they think they like do not need the community itself, but also only because it already has existed almost from the time immemorial. Okay, okay. Let's continue with that. I guess yes, this notion here is this idea is finished here. So we come into the next one. The communists are further reproached with desiring to abolish countries and nationality. The working men have no country. We cannot take from them what they have not got. Since the proletariat must first of all acquire political supremacy, must rise to be the leading class of the nation, must constitute itself the nation, it is so far itself national, though not in the bourgeois sense of the word. National differences and antagonism between peoples are daily more and more vanishing, owing to the development of the bourgeoisie, the freedom of commerce, to the world market, to uniformity in the mode of production, and in the conditions of life corresponding thereto. Thereto? To that place. Okay.
There too.
Thereto. Okay. National differences and antagonism between people are daily more and more vanishing, owing to the development of the bourgeoisie, to freedom of commerce, to the world market, to uniformity in the mode of production and in the conditions of life corresponding thereto, to that place. Okay. The supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish still faster. United action of the leading civilized countries, at least, is one of the first conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. In proportion as the exploitation of one individual by another will also be put an end to, the exploitation of one nation by another will also be put an end to. So as soon as they finish with the exploitation of individuals by other individuals, they will stop the exploitation of one nation by another. In proportion as the antagonism between classes within the nation vanishes, the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. Okay. The charges against communism, made from a religious, a philosophical, and generally from an ideological standpoint, are not deserving of serious examination. Does it require deep intuition to comprehend that man's ideas, views, and conceptions, in one word, man's consciousness, changes with every change in the conditions of his material existence, in his social relations, and in his social life? Well, actually, it does require more than what we have at the moment because, uh, well, maybe I'm wrong, but in my own understanding, man's consciousness, yes, it sort of can change with the change of the materialistic uh, aspects of the life in his with his social relations and social life. But I would argue that it doesn't like changes with every fluctuation of it. Uh, People might be blind to some parts of life when they are shielded by their material uh, wealth and their social status. But if that fluctuates uh, to the if if all of that will take a turn to the worse, and people will and the person will not be any longer shielded from the harsh realities of the life, they might change their consciousness, they might change their views and whatever. And if, or maybe when, the life will stabilize itself again for this person, and they will find themselves again at their better position, I would actually doubt that they will get back to this to their previous state of mind. I think they will carry the load from the harder life with them till their ends, right? So I wouldn't actually agree with that fully, or at least maybe they do not mean exactly that, but they mean that people who live all their lives in material status, with a good social status, with a good material wealth, they have one type of consciousness, and uh, those who don't, other type of. I don't know why they chose the word consciousness, but okay. What else does the history of ideas prove? That the intellectual production changes its character in proportion as material production is changed. The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. Well, of course. Of course, the people at top have much better options to propagate their ideas. Okay. When people speak of the ideas that revolutionize society, they do but express that fact that within the old society the elements of a new one have been created, and that the dissolution of the old ideas keeps even pace with the dissolution of the old conditions of existence. When people speak of the ideas that revolutionize society, they do but express the fact that within the old society the elements of a new one have been created, and that the dissolution of the old ideas keeps even pace with the dissolution of the old conditions of existence. Meaning that as soon as the, well, let's say, revolution in some sense occurred, and old conditions of existence disappear, old ideas disappear with them as well. That does make sense. And therefore, uh, this is the base for their previous claim that the ruling class of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. Okay. When the ancient world was in its last throes, the ancient religions were overcome by Christianity. When Christian ideas succumbed in the 18th century to rationalist ideas, feudal society fought its death battle with the then revolutionary bourgeoisie. The ideas of religious liberty and freedom of consciousness of conscience merely gave expression to this way of free competition with the domain of knowledge. The ideas of religious liberty and freedom of conscience merely gave expression to this way of free competition with the domain of knowledge, within the domain of knowledge. Yeah, rationalism did fought its battles with Christianity, but I don't really familiar with how it has been done. I actually doubt. I'm not sure. In my own semi-intuitional understanding, it wasn't like they had public forums at which they uh, had some debates on which one to choose, Christianity or the uh, rationalism, rationality, but rather the pragmatic exception of rationalist ideas become dominant, and people just sort of semi-silently switch to it. Uh, Silently, maybe for the masses, for some intellectuals, philosophers, I'm sure that they have absolutely noticed that and maybe wrote that down, but I do not have the knowledge at the moment. Undoubtedly, it will be said, religious, moral, philosophical, and juridical ideas have been modified in the course of historical development. But religion, morality, philosophy, political science, and law constantly survives this change. So, in essence, those subjects as religion, morality, philosophy, and others survived, even though they have been modified. They have been changed, subjected to the change. There are, besides, eternal truths such as freedom, justice, etc., that are common to all states of society. But communism abolishes eternal truth, it abolishes all religion and all morality, instead of constituting them on a new basis. It therefore acts in contradiction to all past historical experience. Mhm. Okay. What does this accusation reduce itself to? The history of all past society has consisted in the development of class antagonisms, antagonisms that assume different forms at different epochs. But whatever form they have taken, one fact in common to all past ages with what does it mean? Uh, the exploitation of one part of society by the other. No wonder then that the social consciousness of past ages, despite all the multiplicity and variety it displays, moves within certain common forms or general ideas, which cannot completely vanish except with the total disappearance of class antagonisms. Sorry about that. Yep, I'm just checking. Okay, so I have a feeling that this means that uh, suddenly I remember the phrase. I will not tell the source from it, but uh, it's from one of the popular at the times, but now forgotten shows. The phrase that I I don't want to stop the wheel. I'm going to break it, right? So as if the thing they try to the authors here try to debate the argument that communism try to abolish these internal truths instead of modifying them, and the authors reply to that they do not want to modify it because it's not revolutionary enough, because the ideas in such eternal truths is the class antagonisms and particularly the exploitation of one part of society by the other. And this is the reason why we have a certain similarity uh, between different societies that are presumably, well, should have developed in very different ways if they did not contact each other very well, right? But they didn't. So they. Mhm. Okay, let's keep going. The communist revolution is the most radical rupture with traditional property relations. No wonder that its development involved the most radical rupture with traditional ideas. Okay, that's what I was getting from it. That they thought that just merely modifying this eternal truth is not revolutionary enough. Okay, but let us have done with the bourgeois objections to communism. We have seen above that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class to win the battle of the democracy. Democracy, okay. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest, by degree, all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total productive forces as rapidly as possible. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the conditions of bourgeois production, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which, in the course of the movement, outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads upon the old social order, and are unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the mode of production. Huh. I'm gonna need to look what inroad means. Thank God for the Google. If I were to study this document 50 years earlier, I might have a hard time with that. An instance of something being encroached or reduced by something else. A hostile attack. A raid. Okay. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads of the rights of property, and on the conditions of bourgeois production, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which, in the course of the movement, outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads upon the old social order, and are unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the mode of production. So, okay, revolution. Okay, this we have to. Well, obviously, revolution comes with at least some sort of violence, and despotic inroads sound exactly what might be expected of the revolution. These measures will, of course, be different in different countries. Nevertheless, in most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable. First, abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. 2. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Done. 3. Abolition of all rights of inheritance. That is heavy. 4. Confiscation of the property of all emigrants and rebels. Like at all times. Oh, I guess that if people emigrate, they might think that the notion is that they, in some sense, do not agree with the proletarian's dictature and are in fact soft rebels, something like that. Oh, of course, that's the confiscation sounds also very heavily. Uh, Fifth, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of national bank with state capital as an exclusive monopoly. Six, centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. 7. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands, and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with the common plan. I actually did not see. Well, if the previous text were justification for the following points, I do not see any of that with this last few points. Well, actually, no. I can see the centralization of credit. Okay, I get it. National bank, because it's the only thing that will be allow it to hold capital, right? 6, centralization of the means of communication and transport. They actually mentioned it in the first chapter when they were talking about how establishment of proletarian connections within some provinces earlier took like centuries to be fully established. But now with the common, uh, well, now at the time of the writing of the document, with contemporary railways, this will take years instead of centuries, right? And since one of the goals is the unification of the proletarians, and the transportation is the primary mean to the unification because they have to communicate with each other. The centralization of this means of communication and transport is logical. Yes, okay, I got it. I don't really understand the cultivation of wastelands. Uh, well, I guess that the more you have the food, the better. And if the wastelands will be replaced with rich and fertile land on which the food will grow in any way, this is a good cause. But I do not really understand how this has anything to do with the previous points, with the justification above it, or with the conflict between proletarians and bourgeoisie, or communists and bourgeoisie. At least not directly. Okay. 8. Equal liability of all to work. Everybody has to work. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Again, I do not see why, especially for agriculture. Well, if we take in account the 7th point, uh, with the cultivation of the wastelands, uh, of course, if they cultivate wastelands, they have to create industrial armies to fill the cultivated lands with enough workers. But again, it's like they kind of uh, do not provide the whole picture in this document. 9. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of all distinction between town and country by more equitable distribution of populace over the country. Well, decentralization, I can see why they would find that uh, more desirable for the society, but again, I do not see how this comes from the document at the moment. 10. Free education for all children in public schools. Abolition of children factory labor in its present form. Combination of education with industrial production, etc., etc. Yes, this actually, well, I doubt that anybody would not say that they stand behind this point here. Uh, and this actually were justified uh, a bit earlier. So yeah, okay, good. So we have just a couple of paragraphs in this chapter left. So let's continue. When in the course of development class distinctions have disappeared and all production has been concentrated in the hands of a vast association of the whole nation, the public power will lose its political character. Political power, properly so called, is sorry, political power, properly so called, is merely the organized power of one class for oppressing another. If the proletariat during its contest with the bourgeoisie is compelled by the force of circumstances to organize itself as a class if, by means of revolution, it makes itself the ruling class, and as such sweeps away by the force the old conditions of production, then it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for the existence of class antagonisms and of class generally, and will thereby have abolished its own supremacy as a class. So they implying that the proletarians' dictature, after it is established in the fullest form, at the height of their power, it will cease to exist just because there will be no reason for it to exist, right? Okay, well, that's not what I would agree with, but okay, let's go. In place of the old bourgeois society, with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of which is the condition for the free development of all. In place of the old bourgeois society, with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is a condition for free development of all. Now, this is a beautiful word. Free development of each is a condition for the free development of all. Beautiful phrase, yes. Okay, so this is the second chapter, Proletarians and Communists. The next chapter is chapter 3 for socialist and communist literature. We will talk about that later. I think that, well, I will not make predictions about that at the time, but I'm absolutely sure that we will have to get back to this chapter because it's actually, if the first chapter were felt like some history course for those who didn't pay attention to what happens in their time, and only partially sprinkled with some conclusions and summaries. This is actually feels like a general idea of the whole document, especially like 10 points here are widely cited, quoted as the most prominent points of the Communist Manifesto. So this is a fascinating read. I did enjoy reading it. It has sometimes it uses harder language. Sometimes I do not follow all the logic, but if taken with enough time and dedication, it's understandable. I do not agree with all points here. I do not agree with some part of the logic here, and probably we will talk about that later. But in general, again, I enjoyed the reading of this document so far. We will definitely get back to this part in sometime later. And but for today, I think we're done. And I hope you had, just as I did, you had the blast of your time. And we'll see you again tomorrow. Probably tomorrow, yes. So thank you for watching, and bye bye.